Once a month, when the moon reaches its highest point in the sky and the wild creatures call out to the night, he emerges from a private sanctuary in an undisclosed location outside of Little Rock, Arkansas. Arrayed in his priestly vestments, carrying forth the good news that comic books and graphic novels aren't just for kids, that they aren't just mass and spandex superheroes, that storytelling in a graphic format can be so much more. He is the Graphic Novel Apostle.
Hello and welcome back to the Graphic Novel Apostle podcast. I'm your host, Mark Orenberger, here with you this time on a Wednesday morning instead of our usual Monday. And thank you to all of you for bearing with me on getting out this mini episode a couple of days late this week. Life just does that to you sometimes, I guess. As we get started today, I want to give a special thank you to my guest, Gary Martz, who was on with us last week as we covered the Department of Truth, Volume 1. And I would say that last week was our most successful week so far as a podcast in terms of downloads for a new episode during its first week. And I just wanted to say thank you very much to all of you out there who have been listening. To those of you who are maybe newly discovering the show, welcome. I'm so glad you're here. We got some really positive feedback on last week's episode, and I was really glad to know that people liked it. But I also want to say a special thank you to those of you who have gone on to Spotify or Apple Podcasts and left a star review for the show. A couple of you have even gone on there and left written reviews. And, I've asked you guys to do that before, as most podcast hosts do at some point. I do understand that helps more people discover the show. So thank you so much for those of you who took the time to do it. And if you didn't, I have good news. It's not too late. We are still accepting 5-star reviews. I also want to go ahead and give you guys just a quick look ahead to what we have coming up this coming Monday. We've got my good friend Parish Pollard, who is going to join me to discuss Bone Parish, Volume 1, written by Cullen Bunn with art by Jonas Scharf. This is a fantastic book. Parish and I already recorded our episode, and we had a ton of fun talking about it. I'm really looking forward to you guys getting to hear that episode. That'll be coming up this Monday, 5 a.m. Central Time. So as I'm sure you've already seen from the title of this episode, we're going to be talking today about digital subscription services. Usually I like to use these mini-episode weeks to talk about a couple of books from my pull list. Sometimes it's an opportunity to talk with a creator of a comic, and I love doing those episodes. This week, I had planned to talk about Dead Eyes, The Empty Frames #1 from Image Comics, which was written by Jerry Duggan and art by John McCrae. No, not the lead singer from Cake, a different John McCrae. But that series launched its second volume last week. I really, really enjoyed the book. I'd been planning to do a review and a discussion of it here on this mini episode, but at kind of the last minute, I decided I wanted to hold off on discussing that book. And I want to first do one of our full episodes where I bring a friend on as a guest and talk to them about a book and go through the first volume of Dead Eyes, because that first volume was just wonderful. Dead Eyes is a super cool anti-hero crime story. It's set in Boston, which is a great setting for a book. It is so well written by Jerry Duggan. John McCrae's art is just fantastic. And I think the second volume that's starting to come out right now is really going to be a blast. I got a really good feeling from that first issue. But I also wanted to give this new volume a little bit of time to breathe before I, said too much about it. In fact, I think for these mini episodes, I have felt like when I've had 2 or maybe even 3 issues of a series that have already come out that I could kind of take into consideration when I'm doing a review, I've had a little bit more time to just think about the book, and then also to sort of see how the story is developing, which might be a little different from the impression that you get from your first issue. So we're going to hold off on that one for now. And I decided I wanted to talk about some of the digital comics subscription services that are out there. Now, this certainly does not cover everything that's out there in the market, but I'm going to talk about the services that I'm most familiar with and that I'm happy to recommend. And this might sound like an advertisement for some of those services here as I talk about them and tell you why I like them. It's not. Nobody's paying me, at least not yet. So I don't know if any of you guys out there are listening who have sway in some of these companies. I'd be happy to take a sponsor. But there are 4 services in particular I want to focus on this week. Marvel Unlimited, DC Universe Infinite, GlobalComix, and Hoopla. And Hoopla is not exactly a subscription service. We'll talk about that in a minute. I wanted to first mention, though, that this seems like a particularly relevant topic, and it's one I've seen come up on some discussion boards that I'm part of, because the digital comics landscape has changed quite a bit over the last, 6 months or so. What was for years and years and years the beloved Comixology for a lot of people and had been purchased by Amazon got really fully integrated into Amazon, and now it's really just part of the Kindle app and part of your Amazon products searching experience, and much less so exists as, kind of a separate entity. And so the nature of that has just changed a little bit. But then also I guess it was July, they announced that the digital service Omnibus was going away as well, that I understood was pretty popular with digital readers. I'd actually never used that service. But as I've mentioned Comixology just now, before I go on from it, I do want to take a second to mention this to any of our listeners who might not want to pay for a digital comics subscription service of any kind, but do have some passing interest in comics and are curious about some of the things we talk about on the show. If you are an Amazon Prime member, there were a bunch of comics that have been written and published over the last few years as what are called Comixology originals. And if you've got Amazon Prime, you can read those books for free on the Amazon Kindle app on whatever tablet you have. Now, as far as I can tell, most of those books have also been published in print by Dark Horse. But if you're up for trying a digital reader, you can just go onto Amazon and search Comixology Originals and scroll through there and see whether there's anything that piques your interest. I've got a couple of series that I'd like to recommend that I've read on there and enjoyed terrifically. Canary by Scott Snyder with art by Dan Panosian was a supernatural western. Night of the Ghoul, also by Scott Snyder. This one, the art was done by Francesco Francavilla, who I've talked about on the show before. This is a throwback horror, kind of a haunted movie from the past brings trouble into the present. Cool series. Another very sort of eerie sci-fi type series that I read on Comixology Originals, Lost Falls by Kurt Pyers with art by Antonio Fuso and Pierluigi Minotti. I would be glad to recommend. And then Snow Angels by Jeff Lemire with art done by an artist just known as Jock, Jock, is in some sense your wasteland post-apocalypse type book, except that it's set in a snowy post-apocalypse, not like in a desert one. And it involves these two sisters who are left to sort of fend for themselves in a really unhospitable environment. And they start to discover that maybe some of the things that they've believed their whole lives about what this post-apocalyptic world is like might not be exactly accurate. So Snow Angels, really cool series. So any of those, if you want to get on the Kindle app, get on Amazon and search those. If you're an Amazon Prime member, free to listen to, and I highly recommend them. Okay, let's talk about Marvel Unlimited. We don't talk much about superheroes on this show, at least not traditional superheroes from what are often referred to as the big two, Marvel and DC, but they are a part of my weekly comic reading experience, no doubt. And I have figured out that I'm much less interested in buying paper copies of Marvel and DC comics than I am of purchasing some of those creator-owned independent comics from the types of series that we usually review here on the show. But I love all those superheroes and those villains that we've come to know since childhood, and I want to read their stories. And frankly, there are more books coming out from those two publishers than I would be willing to buy in paper. Or maybe I could get away with buying in paper if Natalie knew what I was bringing home week to week. And so having an option like one of the digital subscription services for Marvel or DC is, for me, fantastic, because I can read as much as I want from not only current books, but also from an enormous tens of thousands of issues back catalog on both services, Marvel and DC, that scratches that itch for me and allows me to keep relatively current. Talking first now specifically about Marvel, their service is called Marvel Unlimited. It costs $9.99 a month, or if you're willing to sign up for a year at a time, it's $69 a year. So that works out to like $5.75 a month. Not like $5.75 a month, exactly $5.75 a month. So really, if you think you would otherwise purchase 2 comic books a month that Marvel publishes, I realize you don't have that paper copy to put in your collection, but you're already ahead of the game in terms of cost. So new comics that Marvel releases come out on the shelves, and they don't hit that digital service until 3 months later. And so, I listen to a lot of other podcasts that are reviewing brand new comics the week they come out. And I guess I haven't really trained myself yet to go back and listen 3 months behind. but it does kind of give me an idea of what's to come, because I'm always reading Marvel 3 months ago. The service will allow you to download some comics onto your tablet so that you can read them offline, which is, great if you're going on a car trip and you're not the driver, or you're going on a plane flight and you're not the pilot, or any place else where you might not have access to Wi-Fi. You can also do panel-by-panel view. In the episode that I did with my mom on the book Friday, we talked about that in terms of it being an added feature, in my opinion, when you read a comic in digital format versus paper, where you can double-click on an individual panel and blow that panel up to either the size of the screen or mostly the size of the screen, and just get a closer look at the art, maybe make out some details that would have been harder for you to see if, your eyes aren't allowing it. And guys, I'm about 4 days in right now to the first pair of glasses with bifocals I've ever had in my life. It's true, this is where I am now. And so I think I'm going to come to appreciate that panel-by-panel view more and more over the years to come. One drawback, though, that I see with the Marvel Unlimited service, as compared to the DC service that we'll talk about in just a second, is that, at least as far as I can see, everything in its catalog that's available to you is presented in its single-issue format, and they do things where they'll put together a reading list from an event, so you can kind of follow in the order that when those books came out. That is, if you had multiple titles that were intersecting with each other over the course of a period of a couple of months. But I would really much prefer if they published some of those on the app in the form of their collected series. So I think back to about 2 years ago, they did this little mini event where the Incredible Hulk and Thor crossed back and forth between titles. I think they did a 5-part story where they alternated between an issue of the Incredible Hulk and an issue of Thor, and then back and forth like that to fill out the story, which is a really cool way to see it. And I'd rather not have to go look up those individual issues or hope that I can find someplace where Marvel has put together a playlist, basically. Whereas on the DC app, they do provide a lot of those in their collected formats as well, and so you don't have that kind of problem. So let me jump over to DC for just a second. DC's subscription service is called DC Universe Infinite, and they have both a standard version of that service and what they call their Ultra as well. And I guess you could just think of that as 2 separate tiers. Their standard service is $7.99 a month, or $74.99 a year. You get that enormous back issue library of DC comics. And for new comics, they get loaded onto the app and made available to you, the reader, 6 months after they were released in stores. Now, if you're on the Ultra plan, which is $119.99 a year, so basically $10 a month, you get an expanded back issue library beyond those things that are available on the standard DC subscription service. You get individual issues and collections. So I think if you're a standard subscriber, and I subscribe to the Ultra tier, of course I do, right? But if you're subscribing to the standard service, I think you only get the individual issues. I don't think you get those collected editions. And instead of having to wait 6 months after comics have been released in stores to show up on the app for you to read, you get them 1 month after they're released. So you are really staying very contemporary. With Marvel at that 3-month delay, sometimes I do feel like I'm lagging a bit behind, especially if they've got an event that's going to cross over, 5 or 6 books and a couple of little mini-series that might be done in 2 months' time. It's like the whole conversation in comics has moved on by the time the very first issue of that is hitting the Marvel Unlimited app for you to read. But when you're only 1 month behind with the DC books, I find that's never a problem. I feel like I'm part of what's going on with current DC comics. Like with the Marvel service, they have the ability to download comics onto your tablet so you can read them offline. They also have that panel-by-panel view like I was talking about with Marvel. And as a bonus as well, I think it's once a year they do this, they will send you a physical copy of some sort of comics collection that they've done specially for their DC Infinite Universe Ultra members. So last year was the 30th anniversary of when they did the Death of Superman storyline back when I was in the 7th grade. And so as a DC Ultra subscriber, I ended up getting in the mail this collected edition that they did. I don't know, maybe it had a cover that was different from what you could get in the store or something like that. But it was nice not to have to go out to the store and purchase that, but have it just show up in the mail as part of the subscription service that I was already paying for. So next I want to talk about GlobalComix, and that's one word, Global, C-O-M-I-X. I've mentioned GlobalComix a couple of times before here on the show, so I know that's not going to be a name that's brand new to regular listeners here, but I've not really ever talked about much in detail what it is they offer. They are a platform where you can go and purchase individual issues of comics and have them for yourself, to keep permanently in your digital collection. But they also have a subscription service, and that's what I really like. They call it their Gold service. It's $79.99 a year. And for what Marvel Unlimited is to Marvel Comics, GlobalComix is to tons and tons and tons of independent comics. And nearly all of the top indie publishers in the industry have some sort of presence on GlobalComix. And it might be different from publisher to publisher, but you've got tons of back catalog from Image Comics, Boom Studios. They just added Dark Horse about a week ago, which was, for me, filling in a big gap that I saw in their service, and I love to see that they've got that now. Vault Comics, Oni Press, Mad Cave, which we've done a lot of on this podcast, AWA, TKO, and a zillion other publishers from people who have just done one comic and found that they could release it on GlobalComix, and they're just kind of, dipping their toes in trying to publish something of their own to a great big publisher like Image Comics. Now, that service also has a whole bunch of manga and webtoon style comics. I'm going to just tell you right now, I really don't know much about what their offerings are in manga or webtoon. I understand it's a huge part of what they do over there. It's just not something I really engage with. And so I probably don't have any business commenting on whether it's a good library or whether it has things that it's missing or what. So I guess I could leave that to the listener to explore. And because it does vary publisher by publisher on what books they choose to put on GlobalComix and when they choose to put them there, you don't quite know for sure what you're going to get. Two publishers whose books I always enjoy, Mad Cave and AWA, seem to be, for most of their titles at least, releasing those books onto GlobalComix on the same day that the books release in print, which is fantastic. Because I'll tell you, with both of those publishers, there are some of their titles that I definitely want to collect in print. I've talked before on here, I did a mini episode where I talked all about the new Dick Tracy series at Mad Cave. I want to own every issue in paper of Dick Tracy. I just do. But some of the other series that I'm enjoying very much, I'm probably not ready to shell out $4 a month to continue reading that series. It's the kind of thing that previously I might have said, I'll wait and see if it gets collected and ends up in the library and I'll look for it there to read the story. But this way I'm able to stay right up to date with it, which has been wonderful. Some of the other publishers, and I'll tell you, I haven't exactly cracked the code of how they're all doing it, and it might not be entirely consistent. But some of the others seem to be doing something where maybe they'll release a first issue around the time that it's released in stores, and then not put the rest of it up on GlobalComix until it's been collected in a trade paperback. It seems like that's what Boom Studios has done with a couple of titles that I've looked at. As I say, it's going to vary from one to the other, but either way, I'm just excited to see all that material there and discover a bunch of stuff in indie comics that might not be on the shelf at the library, might not be at my local comic book shop even, and I get a chance to check it out this way, so I've been very happy with this service. A couple of little drawbacks. GlobalComix has enabled panel-by-panel view, except, and I think this is really up to the publishers that upload their comics there. For the most part, it doesn't actually track the panel-by-panel, and so that ends up not being a feature that works very well. Also, when you get those double-page spreads, like on the Marvel and DC apps, you just turn your tablet on its side, and the 2 pages that are covered on the double-page spread are displayed in that landscape format. GlobalComix mostly doesn't have that. And again, I think that's like the panel-by-panel view, kind of up to the format that the publisher uploads the comic. But for the most part, as I read through these books, when I get to a double-page spread, you have to go page by page to both of the pages on that double-page spread. So you're kind of switching your view back and forth as you try and read the panels across the top of the 2 pages, and then the middle of the 2 pages, and then the bottom. not a big deal by any means, but it is something that I hope over time some of the publishers will correct on there. And then finally, I wanted to talk about Hoopla. So this is not something I'm not aware of any way that you individually as a consumer can go out and subscribe to Hoopla. Maybe they have it, I don't know, I hadn't looked into it. But most people, as far as I know, access Hoopla through their library system. And I am such a huge fan of the Central Arkansas library system right here in Little Rock and Pulaski County. And I've been thrilled to use Hoopla that I'm able to access with my library card from my house with my tablet. And so if your library does not offer Hoopla, man, mention it to your librarian, ask them about it, tell them it's something you'd like to see available in their offerings. Now, I have to imagine this varies from library service to library service, so I'll just talk about what my experience is with the Central Arkansas library system. At your library, it may be different, but on the plan that my library system has, each individual library patron can check out 7 items per month. And it's not just comic books. There are tons of comic books, both single issues and collected editions, and so pro tip, you check out the collected edition and it's just one of your monthly items to borrow. You check out the individual issues, you're burning up those 7 loan items pretty quickly. But they've also got ebooks, audiobooks, magazines. I think they have movies on there that you can do digitally. And I find that they tend to be pretty current with what they offer, at least for the big 2, Marvel and DC, and then also really lots of indie titles too. Now, my library has an aggregate daily limit for all library patrons, so even though you might have 5 items that you can still check out from Hoopla during a given month, if that aggregate daily limit for your library has been hit for the day, then you're going to have to wait until midnight and their count resets to be able to download anything. So, I guess second pro tip, and that is figure out what you want ahead of time and download it in the morning before work. Check that stuff out. And then you get that for a 21-day checkout period, which is plenty of time to get through a graphic novel, I assure you. Anyway, folks, that's what I wanted to talk about this week. I hope you found this of some interest. If you've got questions or thoughts that you wanted to share about any of these, maybe something I'm missing in these services and ought to be taking advantage of, hit me up. You can get me on email, graphicnovelapostle@gmail.com, and then you can also always find me on Instagram @graphicnovelapostle. I look forward to seeing you all back here on Monday of this coming week for our discussion of Bone Parish, Volume 1, with my buddy Parish Pollard. And until then, keep reading those comics.